Hey guys, Austin Maliolo, James Hobart. We're going to break down teaching the muscle up to our class. Now, there's a whole bunch of ways you can do this. We're going to stick with one of the options we have in our lesson plans for an upcoming workout. And again, not the only way, but stick with us here. So, a few things. One, we're going to start on the low ring. So we'll go through it, and we'll also talk about what it would look like from a class setting. Obviously, it's just one coach and one athlete right now. We're going to kick it off with the low rings. We're going to do false grip ring rows. So again, keep in mind, as a coach, you're going to be demoing all this. James will be demoing this for me as a demo, but also he is the athlete. So we want to achieve the karate chop at the wrist on the rings, wrap the thumb and the fingers back and around. And a good coaching cue here is keeping the elbows in tight and turning the knuckles in and then touching one another. So elbows to the body, knuckles in, fingers and thumb wrapped around the rings. Now we want to get everyone underneath the rings. So right where the rings are hanging, we want your feet there. And sometimes a little bit of a love tap so no one moves their feet, because that's important, right? We don't want them to do anything crazy there. Now, we're going to do some ring rows. So from here, what we can do is just have the athletes bend their knees forward and then lean back. Right? Now, this will allow them to get into a unique position. This is not your traditional ring row position, but this is the false grip ring row that will translate to the muscle up transition. Then we simply do some ring rows here. All right? Again, pulling to those armpits, almost pulling as low as possible. Now, making this more challenging for your advanced athletes or your veterans, having their knuckles stay together and maybe pulling lower and keeping their hips up high as they pull. Your newer athletes might struggle just pulling up to their armpits, and that's going to be completely fine. Now, also what we can do is start to teach athletes to a little hip action here as well. So in that back piece, this will be for those individual conversations that we know they have some strict movement where their hips are low, and then they move their hips and pull at the same time, like so. And that will actually translate to the kip a little bit. So again, that's going to be reserved for the more advanced athletes, but a nice way to start to lace in some of that neurological stuff. Probably here, having your athletes go through maybe 30 seconds in piece and then switching for 30 seconds, partnering them, if not putting them in groups of 3. We don't want to over fatigue, but we absolutely want to get reps. And now from here, we move to the muscle up transitions. Lots of wiggle room from abilities here, but everyone can benefit from this base piece, and then we can progress pretty easily. False grip, we've already taught it. We've almost essentially taught that first piece with the feet under the rings, knees forward, leaning back. And that's where we get our athletes. We get everyone in this position together. We'd say, all right, athletes, feet under, false grip, elbows in, knuckles together, knees forward, and lean back. And now from here, we'd say, now what we want you to do is pull to your belly button, pull up nice and low, and then back down. Again, we have them go up and down and this is your opportunity to coach to see if someone does something funky, right? So again, pull and then back down, highlighting that our athletes are using their legs, less pull at this point. Now, once they're pulling to the rings, now from here we say, send your head in front of the rings and send your butt back into that transition. Now we are through the rings, and we pause them here to make sure that the shoulders below the elbow, the biceps on the rings. You can do a tester here for maybe your advanced athletes of taking your feet off the ground and then back down. Even some of your athletes that want to try that might not be there, even 1 foot off the ground or going to your tippy toes as a nice little way to keep everyone involved in that piece. Once they're in that bottom position, now we're ready for essentially a jumping dip or a ring dip. So they can jump to the top and then come back down, or they can take their feet off the ground and then press out. And again, already lacing in multiple levels of difficulty. The whole time the feet can be on the ground. So for our athletes that might be struggling on the rings, we would have the rings low and they can press through the entire time, just like so with their feet on the ground. So some preparation for this as coaches, making sure you have lower rings set up for the athletes that need to have their feet on the ground throughout the duration of the transition. Now, probably about a minute per athlete, because one transition takes a good amount of time. What we also want to focus on, maybe not so much for the newer athletes, but for the vets, is the way down. So making sure we teach it briefly in that general instruction. So telling them once you're at the top, we then reverse it. Come down to the bottom of the ring dip, shoulders forward, elbows back, and then from here, tracing your knuckles underneath your chest, knuckles together, and then leaning back to that bottom position. And then pull to the rings, through the rings, and then above the rings, and relax. Walking everyone through that, knowing that you might lose some people on that return, and that's okay, because for the newer athletes, we might just have to worry about that way up, and that's all right. But for the vets, they now can work on those stringing together pieces. Because making this way up, we can make it easier pretty simply, or more difficult, pretty easy, by bringing the feet out in front a little further, right? All the way, if you want to challenge the athletes as a test, to do an L-sit, strict muscle up before we get up to those high rings and coming through, like so. And that could be a test. We really would like to see our athletes do that before they get kipping up on the higher rings. And that should be that prereq. And if we don't have a strict, we're not going to let our athletes kip around. We can let them practice in the warm-up, maybe get that first one, but we don't want to try to volumize that. It could get messy and sloppy. So again, spending a good amount of time here. This is your time as a coach to actually go in and coach people. Making sure you keep an eye on, hey, if you haven't rotated, rotate. People will forget, so make sure you as a coach use that group management tool every minute, 45 seconds, telling them to transition. Maybe give yourself 5 minutes or 6 minutes, depending on if you're in groups 2 or 3. So work hard and have fun with this one.